The laugh cut through the store like shattered glass. It was sharp, loud, deliberate. "Oh my God," the clerk said, not even bothering to lower her voice. "Are you serious right now?" Every head turned. Standing at the center of the luxury boutique, beneath chandeliers that glittered like frozen stars, was a young black woman in a faded brown coat. The sleeves were frayed at the cuffs. The fabric had been washed too many times, the color dulled by years of struggle. Her shoes were clean but worn thin at the soles, and the strap of a cracked leather bag hung nervously from her shoulder as her fingers clenched it tight. She hadn't spoken yet. She didn't need to. The clerk, tall and perfectly styled in a sleek black uniform with a gold name badge, looked her up and down slowly like inspecting a stain. "You know this is a designer store, right?" The clerk scoffed, folding her arms. "Not a thrift shop, not a charity." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Someone near the perfume counter whispered, "Did she really walk in here dressed like that?" Another voice muttered, "She must be lost." A phone lifted, then another. Red recording lights blinked on. The woman's cheeks burned. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, swallowing words that refused to come out. I just wanted to ask," she began softly. The clerk laughed again, louder this time. "Ask," she repeated, eyes wide with mock surprise. "Sweetie, the bags in here cost more than whatever you've got in that purse." A few people chuckled nervously. Others stared at the floor. No one stepped in. The woman's hands trembled as she pulled the strap of her coat tighter around her body, as if trying to make herself smaller. "I was told to come here," she said, barely above a whisper. "They said someone might." "Who?" the clerk snapped. "Who told you that?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Let me guess," the clerk continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "Another sob story, looking for a handout, a discount? Or did you think you could just walk in here and pretend you belong?" The word belong hit like a slap. The boutique fell into an uneasy hush. Crystal heels clicked softly somewhere behind them. The air smelled of expensive leather and cold judgment. The woman's eyes darted around the room, at the marble floors, the mirrored walls, the women wrapped in silk and confidence. She could feel their stares crawling over her coat, her hair pulled back too tightly because she couldn't afford a salon, the faint patch on her sleeve she'd stitched herself at dawn. Her voice cracked. "Please, I'm not trying to cause trouble, I just need—" The clerk stepped closer, invading her space. "Need," she echoed. "What you need is to leave before security has to escort you out." A sharp breath escaped the woman's lips. The crowd watched. No one spoke. A man near the entrance shifted uncomfortably but looked away. A woman clutching a designer bag pressed it closer to her chest, as if poverty were contagious. The humiliation was complete, public, merciless, and loud. The woman's eyes glistened. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears she couldn't afford to shed, not here, not in front of these people. But then, from the far end of the store, near a display of unfinished sketches framed like priceless art, a man stopped walking. He had been quiet, observing. His coat was simple, expensive, but without logos. His silver-streaked hair was neatly combed, his posture calm, deliberate. He had noticed the laughter, the raised voice, the silence that followed, and now his eyes were fixed on the trembling woman in the worn coat. The clerk didn't see him yet. She was too busy delivering the final blow. "Honestly," the clerk said, waving a dismissive hand, "people like you always think today is going to be your lucky day." The woman's knees nearly buckled. And that was the moment when the stranger took a step forward. But before he spoke, before the truth cracked the room wide open, "Let me ask you something. Question of the day, have you ever been judged, dismissed, or humiliated just because of how you looked or where you came from? Before anyone knew your real story? Tell us in the comments. And while you're there, let us know where you're watching from today. Because what's about to happen next will remind us all how dangerous assumptions can be." As the clerk's laughter echoed one last time, the stranger's gaze hardened, not with anger but with certainty. A certainty that said this ends now. The woman didn't know it yet. The crowd didn't know it yet. But the person who had quietly chosen her, out of everyone, was standing only a few steps away. And everything was about to change. Let's go back to how this story truly began this morning. The morning began long before the sun rose. In a narrow apartment on the fourth floor of a weathered brick building, the sound of a kettle rattling on a dented stove cut through the silence. The kitchen was small, barely enough room for two people to stand without brushing shoulders, but it was clean, immaculate even, the kind of cleanliness that comes not from abundance but from pride. Her name was Amara Lewis. She was 26 years old, though the quiet weight in her eyes made her seem older. Life had carved lines into her spirit far too early, yet it had never broken her. There was a gentleness about her, something steady and kind, that hardship had not managed to erase. Amara stood at the stove in thick socks, stirring a pot of oatmeal with slow, careful movements. She hummed softly under her breath, a tune her mother used to sing when things were hard. The sound was almost a whisper, but it filled the room with warmth. Behind her, on a thin mattress laid neatly against the wall, a small cough broke the quiet. "Mama," a little voice called. Amara turned instantly. "Yes, baby, I'm here." On the bed lay Caleb, her 8-year-old brother. His cheeks were too pale. His eyes, usually bright and curious, looked dull with exhaustion. A thin blanket was tucked tightly around him, though the room wasn't cold. She crossed the floor in 3 steps and knelt beside him, pressing the back of her hand gently to his forehead. Her smile never wavered, even though worry twisted sharply in her chest. "How are you feeling this morning?" she asked softly. Caleb shrugged weakly. "My chest hurts again." Amara swallowed. "I know," she said gently, brushing his curls away from his forehead, "but you're being so strong, stronger than me." He tried to smile at that. On the small table beside the bed sat a brown paper bag with a pharmacy logo printed on the side. It was half empty. Inside were prescription bottles, one of them nearly empty, the label peeling at the corners. Amara's gaze lingered there for just a second too long. She stood and turned back to the stove before Caleb could see the fear in her eyes. Their apartment told a quiet story. Second-hand furniture, a couch with a carefully stitched tier, family photos taped to the wall instead of framed. In one picture, Amara stood beside a woman with the same warm eyes and wide smile. Her mother, taken years before illness had taken her away. Since then, Amara had become everything. Sister, caregiver, provider, protector. Their parents were gone, their relatives distant or struggling themselves. What little money Amara earned working long shifts at a neighborhood laundromat barely covered rent, utilities, and groceries, let alone hospital bills and medication for Caleb's worsening condition. Still, every morning she rose with purpose. She poured the oatmeal into 2 bowls, adding a small drizzle of honey to Caleb's, saving the plain one for herself. She carried his bowl to the bed, blowing on each spoonful before feeding him carefully, patiently, as if time itself had slowed to match her tenderness. "You going to work today?" Caleb asked between bites. Amara hesitated. She had taken the day off, but she smiled anyway. "Not today," she said. "Today I've got something important to do." Caleb studied her face. "Is it scary?" She laughed softly. "Maybe a little." He reached for her hand, his fingers thin but warm. "You'll be okay, you always are." The faith in his voice nearly undid her. After breakfast, Amara helped him sit up and carefully fitted his inhaler into his small hands. "Remember," she said, steady and calm, "slow breaths, just like we practiced." When he finished, she kissed the top of his head. "I'm going to step out for a bit," she said. "Ms. Evelyn from downstairs will check on you, okay?" Caleb nodded, already tired again. In the tiny bathroom, Amara splashed water on her face and stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Her eyes were tired. Her coat hung on the back of the door, the same faded brown one she would later wear into that boutique. She ran her fingers over the fabric, smoothing it down as if willing it to look newer. "I don't need to look rich," she whispered to herself. "I just need to be heard." She braided her hair carefully, neat and simple. No makeup, no jewelry, just dignity. Before leaving, she knelt beside Caleb once more. "Be good," she said softly. "I always am," he replied, managing a weak grin. At the door, Amara paused, her hand resting on the knob. She took one last look at the apartment, the place that held her love, her fear, her reason for breathing. Today wasn't about pride, it was about survival. She stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind her, and whispered a quiet prayer she'd been carrying since dawn. "Please, just let someone see me today." And with that, Amara began walking toward a day that would change her life forever. By the time Amara reached the street, the city was awake. Buses groaned as they pulled away from crowded stops. Horns blared in impatient bursts. People hurried past her with earbuds in, coffee cups in hand, eyes fixed forward as if looking too closely at anyone else might slow them down. Amara walked with purpose, but every step felt heavier than the last. In her coat pocket, her fingers curled around a folded piece of paper, creased so many times it was soft at the edges. She pulled it out again as she walked, even though she already knew every word by heart. Past due notice, the bold red letters screamed at her. Below it, a number she couldn't breathe around. Caleb's medication, the specialist appointment, the tests they said he couldn't go without anymore. She had begged, she had negotiated, she had stretched every dollar until it nearly tore in half. Still, it wasn't enough. Just the night before, she had sat on the edge of Caleb's bed as he slept, listening to the uneven rhythm of his breathing. Every hitch had felt like a countdown, every cough like a warning. The doctor's voice echoed in her mind. If he misses another week of treatment, his condition could worsen quickly. Quickly. That word terrified her more than anything else. Amara stopped at a crosswalk and closed her eyes, pressing her forehead briefly against the cold metal pole of the street sign. Her chest tightened. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I really am." When the light changed, she crossed and turned down a quieter street, pulling her phone from her bag. The screen was cracked, one corner dark where the display had finally started to give up, just like everything else. She opened her banking app. Balance, $43.17. Her throat closed. She had already asked everyone she could. Ms. Evelyn from downstairs had slipped her $20 with a sad smile and a warning not to pay it back. Her manager at the laundromat had offered extra shifts but no advance. She had called a charity hotline and been placed on hold until the call dropped. Last night, in one final act of desperation, Amara had sold the only thing of real value she owned, her mother's old gold bracelet, to a pawn shop. The money sat heavy in her bag, burning like guilt. It still wasn't enough. The luxury boutique loomed 2 blocks ahead, its tall glass windows reflecting the sky like a promise that didn't belong to her. She slowed her steps. The idea had come to her in the most unlikely way, through a woman she overheard at the laundromat bragging loudly on the phone. "I'm telling you," the woman had said, tossing her wet clothes into a dryer, "the designer himself is in town, choosing someone, a real person, for his new line, not models, real stories." Amara hadn't meant to listen, but the words had settled in her chest and refused to leave. Later, she had searched it online, read every article she could find. A billionaire fashion designer. Known for breaking rules, for choosing unexpected muses, for walking into his own stores unannounced. It sounded ridiculous, impossible, but impossibility was all she had left. If there was even the smallest chance, 1%, that this could lead to something, money, work, help, she had to try. For Caleb, a sudden sharp pain shot through her chest as panic surged. What if they laugh at me? What if they throw me out? What if I walk in there and confirm everything I'm afraid they see? Her vision blurred. She ducked into the doorway of a closed shop and pressed her back against the cool brick, sliding down until she was crouched on the sidewalk. Her shoulders shook. "I can't do this," she whispered, tears spilling freely now. "I can't." Images flashed through her mind, Caleb's thin smile, his labored breathing, the empty pill bottle on the table. The sound of his cough echoed in her ears. Amara dragged in a shaky breath and wiped her face with the sleeve of her coat. She looked down at her hands, calloused, honest, trembling. "No," she said aloud, firmer this time. "I have to." She stood, legs unsteady but determined. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about time running out. She checked the address again. Same one. The boutique's glass doors gleamed ahead, untouched by the grime of the city around it. Inside, she could see movement, people browsing, laughing softly, living a life that seemed light years away from hers. Her stomach twisted painfully. Amara reached into her bag and pulled out the inhaler Caleb had forgotten that morning. She held it tightly, grounding herself in its familiar shape. "For you," she whispered. "Everything for you." With that, she made a decision that terrified her more than anything else she'd ever done. She would walk in. She would ask, even if it meant being humiliated, even if it meant breaking apart in front of strangers. Because walking away without trying would mean watching her brother suffer, and that was something she could never live with. Amara straightened her coat, lifted her chin, and took one final breath. Then she stepped toward the entrance, unaware that her courage was already being watched, and that someone inside knew exactly who he was looking for. The glass doors of the boutique stood like a barrier between 2 worlds. Amara stopped just a few feet away, her reflection staring back at her from the flawless surface. For a brief, cruel moment, all she could see were the differences. The coat that had seen better years, the scuffed shoes, the faint shadows under her eyes from nights without sleep. She inhaled slowly. "You belong wherever you stand," she reminded herself. Her mother's voice echoed softly in her mind. "Dignity doesn't come from money. It comes from knowing who you are." The doors slid open with a whisper. Cool air wrapped around her as she stepped inside, carrying the faint scent of polished leather and expensive perfume. The boutique was quiet but not peaceful. Every sound felt amplified. The soft click of heels on marble, the low murmur of wealthy conversations, the subtle rustle of fabric as someone flipped through a rack of clothing that cost more than Amara made in months. Her footsteps sounded too loud. She hesitated, fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. She could feel eyes on her already, quick glances, raised brows, subtle double takes that stung more than open stares. "Don't rush," she told herself. Just breathe, she walked slowly, taking in the space around her. The store felt more like an art gallery than a place to shop. Each piece of clothing hung alone, lit perfectly, as if it were priceless. Sketches lined the walls, raw pencil drawings of people who looked powerful, vulnerable, real. She wondered what story the artist had seen in them. As she moved deeper into the store, her heart began to race. She rehearsed the words in her head for the 100th time. "Excuse me. I was told someone here might be able to help me. I'm looking for information about. I heard there was an opportunity. None of it sounded right." Her palms were slick with sweat. She wiped them discreetly on the inside of her coat. A group of women near the center display glanced at her, then leaned closer together. Their whispers were soft but sharp. "She's brave, I'll give her that. I wonder if she knows where she is." Amara pretended not to hear them. Her eyes searched the room for anyone who looked approachable, anyone kind. But every employee she spotted wore the same cool expression, the same tailored uniform that seemed designed to create distance. At the far end of the store, near a private fitting area, stood a man quietly examining a display. He wore a dark coat, simple but impeccably cut. His attention seemed focused on a mannequin dressed in an unfinished piece, pinning, adjusting, frowning slightly as if lost in thought. Amara didn't notice him. Her focus was locked on the front counter, where a tall, blonde clerk stood scrolling on a tablet. The woman looked up, her eyes immediately narrowing. Amara felt her stomach drop. This is it, she thought. With each step toward the counter, her anxiety grew heavier. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. The marble floor felt cold beneath her feet, as if reminding her she didn't belong here. Halfway there, she stopped. For just a moment, doubt surged back with full force. "Turn around," a voice whispered inside her. "You can still leave. No one will stop you." Her gaze drifted to the exit. Then she saw Caleb's face in her mind, pale, tired, trying to smile through pain. Amara closed her eyes. "No," she whispered. "Not today." She squared her shoulders and continued forward. The clerk looked her up and down slowly, lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Yes," the clerk said, her tone sharp and impatient. "Can I help you?" The words weren't kind, but they were an opening. Amara swallowed hard. "Yes," she said softly. "I was hoping to speak to someone about," she faltered. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "About what?" Amara took a breath, steadying herself. "I heard there might be an opportunity here," she said. "Something about choosing someone. I was told to come in and ask." The clerk's mouth twitched. "Who told you that?" she asked, already sounding amused. "A woman I met," Amara replied. "She said the designer." The clerk laughed, not loudly yet, but enough. "The designer," she repeated, glancing around as if inviting others to enjoy the joke. "And you thought what exactly?" Heat rushed to Amara's face. "I just wanted to ask," she said quickly. "I don't mean any trouble. If there's someone I could speak to or—" The clerk leaned back against the counter, crossing her arms. "I don't think you understand how things work here," she said coolly. A few heads turned. Amara felt the weight of attention settle on her shoulders like a heavy coat she couldn't take off. Her throat tightened. "I understand I might not look like," she began. The clerk cut her off. "Oh, you definitely don't." A soft ripple of laughter spread nearby. Amara's vision blurred slightly, fear and humiliation tangling together. She hadn't even said what she came to say, and already the ground beneath her felt unstable. Somewhere behind her, the man at the far end of the store had stopped adjusting the mannequin. He was watching now, carefully. As the clerk prepared to say more words that would slice even deeper, Amara stood frozen, caught between running away and standing her ground. The confrontation was only just beginning, and she had no idea how close she was to the moment that would change everything. The clerk's smile sharpened. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, the kind meant to remind someone of their place. "I'm going to be very clear," she said, tapping her manicured fingernail against the tablet. "This store is private, exclusive. We don't just let anyone wander in and start asking for opportunities." Amara felt every word land like a blow. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'm not asking for anything for free. I just wanted to know if there was someone I could speak to." "I was told." "Told by who?" The clerk interrupted again, louder this time. "Because whoever filled your head with that nonsense did you a real disservice." A man near the accessories display snorted softly. Amara's shoulders stiffened. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears. "I don't want to waste your time," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. "I can leave if—" "Oh, I think that would be best," the clerk replied briskly. "Before you embarrass yourself any further." The words stung more than Amara expected. She glanced around the store, hoping, without knowing why, that someone might meet her eyes with kindness. But the faces she saw were carefully blank, curious, detached. a few openly judgmental. No one spoke. The clerk stepped out from behind the counter, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she circled Amara like a predator assessing weak prey. "Let me guess," she said, lowering her voice just enough to make people lean in. "You saw something online and thought this was your big break." Amara swallowed. "I thought it might be a chance." "A chance," the clerk echoed, laughing softly. "This isn't a lottery ticket, and it certainly isn't a rescue mission." Amara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I'm not looking to be rescued," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I just need help." That did it. The clerk's expression hardened. "You need help," she repeated, her voice rising. "We all need help. That doesn't mean we barge into places we don't belong." A hush fell over the boutique. The word belong again. Amara felt her chest constrict. "I didn't barge in," she said softly. "I walked in and asked politely." The clerk scoffed. "Polite doesn't change reality." She turned slightly, addressing the room now. "This store caters to clients who actually purchase our designs," she announced. "Not people looking for sympathy." A woman near the racks nodded faintly, as if in agreement. Amara's face burned. "I'm sorry," she said, the word slipping out before she could stop it. "I didn't mean to." The clerk raised a hand sharply. "Enough." She glanced toward the entrance. "Security," she called out, her voice carrying easily. "Can we get some assistance here?" Amara's heart dropped into her stomach. "I'm leaving," she said quickly. "I'm already going." She turned toward the door, but the clerk stepped into her path. "Not so fast," the clerk said. "I need to make sure you understand something before you go." Amara looked up, eyes shining with unshed tears. "Yes." The clerk leaned in just enough for her words to cut deeply. "People like you," she said quietly, "always think you're one conversation away from a miracle, but the truth is miracles don't happen in places like this for people like you." The cruelty was surgical. A sharp inhale escaped Amara's lips. Her knees felt weak. Around them, phones were raised higher now. Whispers buzzed through the air like static. "Did she really say that? That's harsh, but true, isn't it?" Amara's vision swam. She had known this could happen. She had prepared herself for rejection, but this public stripping of dignity felt unbearable. "I just wanted to try," she whispered. The clerk straightened, satisfied. "Well, now you have," she said, "and you failed." Silence followed, heavy, absolute. Amara stood there, exposed and shaking, the weight of every stare pressing down on her. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Somewhere in the crowd, the man in the dark coat took a slow step forward. No one noticed yet. The clerk gestured toward the door. "Show yourself out." Amara nodded faintly. She turned, her movements slow, mechanical, as if her body were no longer fully hers. Each step toward the exit felt like a mile. The humiliation clung to her skin, and still no one stopped it. No one spoke up. No one said her name. As she reached for the door, her shoulders trembling, the silence of the crowd pressed harder than any insult. She had never felt so small, and she had never been closer to breaking. Amara's fingers brushed the cool metal handle of the door. For a split second, she thought about running, about pushing it open, stepping back into the noise and anonymity of the street, where no one knew her name or her shame, where she could cry without being watched. Where this moment might dissolve into just another scar she'd carry quietly, but her body wouldn't move. Her hand trembled against the handle as the weight of what had just happened settled fully into her chest. Behind her, the clerk sighed loudly, an exaggerated, irritated sound meant to hurry her along. "Well," the clerk said, "we don't have all day." Amara swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight, as if something had wrapped around it and refused to loosen. She opened her mouth to say "I'm sorry" again, because that was what she always said when the world hurt her, but no sound came out. The silence stretched, and in that silence something inside her cracked. Her shoulders began to shake. At first she tried to hide it, biting down on her lip, forcing herself to breathe slowly. But the tears came anyway, blurring the pristine white walls, the elegant displays, the faces of people who watched her unravel like it was entertainment. She turned halfway back toward the room, not because she wanted to, but because her legs had gone weak. "I'm sorry," she whispered at last, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble, Her voice collapsed into a sob. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to contain it, mortified by the sound of her own grief echoing through the boutique. The clerk rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't start crying now," she said sharply. "This is exactly why we can't let people like you." She stopped herself, then smirked. "You know what? Never mind." Amara's knees buckled slightly. She caught herself against the doorframe, her bag slipping from her shoulder and hitting the floor with a soft thud. The sound seemed to echo far too loudly. Inside the bag, the inhaler clattered against the pavement of her life, unseen, unheard. Someone near the back cleared their throat. No one moved. Amara bent slowly to pick up her bag, her hands shaking so badly she fumbled with the strap. Tears dripped onto the polished marble floor, leaving dark spots that she hurriedly tried to wipe away with her sleeve. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice barely audible now. "I'll go, I promise." She wasn't apologizing for coming anymore. She was apologizing for existing. The clerk crossed her arms, her patience clearly gone. "Please do," she said. "You're making everyone uncomfortable." That was the moment Amara felt it. Not anger, not fear, but a deep, hollow emptiness. She realized, standing there, humiliated and alone, that no one was coming to help her, not the crowd, not the universe, not even hope. The people around her avoided her gaze with careful precision. A woman who had been recording slowly lowered her phone, suddenly embarrassed. A man near the door stared at his shoes. Someone coughed. Their silence was deafening. It told Amara everything she needed to know. "You don't matter enough," her thoughts spiraled. What was I thinking? Who did I think I was? How could I ever believe someone like me could be chosen? She thought of Caleb, of the way he'd smiled that morning, trusting her completely. The guilt hit her like a physical blow. "I failed you," she whispered, though no one heard it. She straightened slowly, forcing herself upright despite the way her body trembled. Her face felt hot and numb all at once, tears streaking down unchecked. "I'm leaving," she said, not to the clerk, but to herself. "I'm going." She reached for the door again. "Finally," the clerk muttered under her breath. Amara paused. Her hand rested on the handle, her shoulders slumped, her spirit worn thin. For one brief, heartbreaking moment, she considered letting go completely, sliding down to the floor, letting the tears come, letting the world see just how much it hurt. But she didn't. Because she had learned a long time ago that breaking in public only made people turn away faster. So she did the hardest thing of all. She held herself together. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing tears across her skin. She took a shaky breath, then another, until she could stand without swaying. Her voice, when she spoke again, was barely there. "I understand," she said quietly. "I won't come back." The clerk nodded, already turning away, as if Amara were no longer worth looking at. That dismissal, so casual, so complete, cut deeper than any insult. Amara pushed the door open. Cold air rushed in from outside, brushing against her tear-stained face. The noise of the street spilled into the boutique, jarring and real. She took one step forward, then she stopped, because just as she was about to leave, just as she was about to disappear back into a world that had no room for her, a calm, steady voice spoke from behind her. "Excuse me." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. But something about it, measured, composed, unwavering, made the entire room still. Amara froze. The clerk turned, irritation flashing across her face. "Yes," she snapped. "Can I help you?" The man in the dark coat stepped forward into full view now. He looked at Amara first, really looked at her, not at her coat, not at her shoes, at her face, at her tears, at the quiet strength it took to still be standing. His eyes softened, then he turned to the clerk. "I believe," he said calmly, "that you owe this young woman an apology." The air in the boutique shifted, and for the first time since Amara had walked in, the silence felt different, charged, expectant, as if the storm had finally reached its breaking point. The clerk let out a short, incredulous laugh. "I'm sorry," she said, turning fully toward the man now. "Do you work here?" The question was sharp, dismissive, designed to reassert control. The man didn't answer right away. He stood with an easy confidence, hands relaxed at his sides, posture straight but unthreatening. Up close, there was something quietly commanding about him. Not loud authority, not arrogance, just presence, the kind that came from knowing exactly who you were and not needing to prove it. Amara remained frozen near the door, her heart racing again, but for a different reason this time. She didn't know why, but the sound of his voice, calm, steady, had reached a place inside her that the insults couldn't touch. The man glanced at her once more before speaking. "She hasn't done anything wrong," he said gently, "and the way you spoke to her was unnecessary." The clerk scoffed. "Sir, with all due respect," she replied, folding her arms, "this doesn't concern you. I'm handling a situation." "A situation," he repeated mildly. It looked more like humiliation. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The clerk's jaw tightened. "We reserve the right to remove anyone who doesn't meet our standards." "Standards," the man echoed again, as if testing the word. He took a step closer, not aggressively, but deliberately placing himself subtly between Amara and the clerk. The gesture was small, almost unnoticeable, but it mattered. Amara felt it immediately. For the first time that day, someone was standing with her. "I think she was just asking a question," the man said, "and I think she deserved an answer, not ridicule." The clerk tilted her head, unimpressed. "And who exactly are you to decide that?" she asked. The man smiled faintly. Someone who believes dignity isn't determined by clothing, he replied. The clerk laughed sharply. This is a business, not a philosophy class. A few people chuckled nervously, unsure which side was safer to stand on. The man's expression didn't change. Businesses, he said evenly, are made of people, and how we treat them matters. The clerk's patience snapped. Listen, she said, raising her voice slightly. If you're here to shop, you're welcome to do so. But if you're here to cause trouble, I can have security escort both of you out. Both of you. The words landed like a challenge. Amara's breath caught. She turned her head slightly toward the man, panic flickering across her face. You don't have to do this, she whispered. I'm leaving anyway. I don't want to get you in trouble. The man looked at her, and his gaze softened even more. You're not in trouble, he said quietly. And neither am I. The certainty in his voice startled her. The clerk rolled her eyes dramatically. Security, she called again, louder this time. I need assistance at the front. The atmosphere in the boutique shifted, tense, electric. A uniformed guard at the far end of the store began to move, hesitating as he took in the scene. The man turned slightly, addressing the clerk with calm authority. Before you do that, he said, I suggest you take a breath. The clerk laughed. Oh, now you're giving me advice? Yes, he replied simply. I am. The crowd leaned in, phones were raised again, capturing every second. The clerk's face flushed. You're being disruptive, she snapped. And frankly, you're out of line. The man nodded slowly. Perhaps, he said, but what's truly out of line is shaming someone who came here in good faith. He gestured lightly toward Amara. She walked in with hope, he continued. And you crushed it for sport. A hush fell. Amara's eyes stung again, but this time the tears were different. Not just pain, relief, validation. The clerk looked momentarily unsettled, but only for a second. She straightened, regaining her sharp edge. I don't know what game you think you're playing, she said coldly, but you don't get to tell me how to do my job. The man met her gaze. Then perhaps, he said evenly, you should reconsider how you're doing it. The guard had stopped a few steps away, uncertain. Sir, the guard said carefully. Is there a problem here? The clerk opened her mouth to speak, but the man raised a hand, not to silence her, but to signal patience. There is, he said calmly, but it's not what you think. He turned fully toward the guard. This young woman was treated with disrespect, he said, publicly, repeatedly. The guard glanced at Amara, then back at the clerk. The clerk scoffed. She doesn't belong here. The man's eyes hardened, not with rage, but with something far more dangerous, conviction. Belonging, he said slowly, is not yours to decide. The words hung in the air. The crowd was silent now, completely. Amara's heart pounded as she stood just behind him, her hand gripping the strap of her bag like a lifeline. She had no idea who this man was, only that he had stepped into her storm without hesitation. The clerk crossed her arms tightly, her confidence beginning to crack, but she forced a laugh anyway. And who's going to stop me? She asked. You. The man took one final step forward. Yes, he said quietly, I am. Something in his tone made the room hold its breath because it wasn't a threat, it was a promise. And in that moment, before the truth was revealed, before the power shift became undeniable, the clerk had no idea she was standing face to face with the person who could end her career with a single sentence. The reveal was coming, and it would change everything. The boutique was silent. Not the quiet of a luxury store, but the heavy electric silence that happens when everyone suddenly realizes something is happening that matters. The clerk stood rigid, her confidence slipping like sand through her fingers. She had always been the one in control here in her domain. She was used to being the voice that decided who belonged and who didn't, but the man in front of her wasn't intimidated. He wasn't angry. He was calm, and that calm made the room feel unsettled. Ard shifted, unsure what to do. The crowd held their breath. Phones were still raised, capturing the moment like it was already historic. The clerk's voice shook slightly, trying to regain authority. Listen, she said, her tone tight. I don't know who you are, but you don't have any right to. The man raised a hand, not to interrupt her, to stop the moment. He looked directly at her, and then in the calmest voice possible, he said words that felt like a thunderclap. I am the designer. The room froze. Clerk's mouth opened slowly. Her eyes widened. A sharp intake of breath escaped her. The name spoken so quietly seemed impossible, unreal. A billionaire designer, the man who had been rumored to be in town, the one who was known for choosing ordinary people with extraordinary stories, the man who could make or break careers with a single decision. He was standing in front of her right now in her store, and he had just revealed the truth. The crowd erupted into whispers, shocked and confused. What? Someone whispered, No way. That's him. The clerk's face turned pale. She stumbled backward slightly as if she'd been struck. You're lying, she said, but her voice didn't have the conviction it had before. The man's expression didn't change. He looked at her with quiet intensity. I'm not lying, he said. You've been so busy judging people based on what they wear that you forgot what this store was built for. Amara stood behind him, still trembling, still unable to believe what she was hearing. Her eyes darted between the man and the clerk. Her mind raced. The designer, here, in this store, the clerk's arrogance cracked into panic. You can't just, she began, but the words failed her. The designer turned toward the crowd. And you, he said, addressing everyone, have just watched a woman be humiliated for no reason. The room went quiet again. The designer's voice was gentle, but it carried the weight of authority. He stepped closer to Amara, his eyes softening. Are you okay? He asked. Amara blinked rapidly, her voice failing her again. I'm fine, she whispered. He shook his head gently. No, he said, you're not fine, and that's okay. The designer turned back to the clerk. You need to apologize, he said calmly. The clerk swallowed hard. No, she spat, suddenly angry again. I don't owe her anything. The designer's gaze hardened. Then you will be leaving, he said. The clerk's face went pale. What? She whispered, shocked. The designer nodded slowly. Yes, he said. You will be leaving. The guard stepped forward, uncertain, but the designer raised a hand. Not yet, he said. I want to make something clear. He turned to the clerk again. You are not just being removed from this store, he said, his voice steady. You are being removed from the company. A murmur spread through the crowd. The clerk's eyes filled with fear. No, she said, shaking her head. You can't do that. I've been here for years. The designer's expression remained unchanged. I can, he said simply. I will. The clerk's body went still. She stared at him as if she couldn't believe her own reality. The crowd watched, stunned. Then the designer did something unexpected. He didn't just fire her. He spoke to Amara. He stepped forward, extending his hand gently. Amara, he said, using her name like it was sacred. I've been looking for you. Amara froze. How do you know my name? She whispered. The designer's expression softened even more. I know your story, he said. I've been following it. Amara's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't just from pain. They were from shock, from disbelief, from hope. You, she began, but her voice caught. The designer continued. I know what you've been through, he said. I know what you're doing for your brother, and I know how much you deserve dignity. The clerk, hearing this, stumbled backward again, her anger now turning into fear. You can't just, she began, but no one listened. The designer had already shifted the energy of the room. He turned to the crowd. This woman is not a problem, he said. She is a person. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, but this time they were filled with shame. Some people looked down, some looked away, others stared at the designer in awe. The boutique, once a place of judgment, had become a courtroom. The clerk, now completely exposed, stood silently, her arrogance gone. The designer turned back to Amara. Come with me, he said softly. Amara looked at him, stunned. Why? She whispered. The designer smiled. Because you deserve to be chosen, he said, not mocked. The crowd watched, speechless, as the designer reached for her hand. And Amara, still shaking, still scared, still unsure if this was real, placed her hand in his. The moment the designer touched her, something shifted. The air seemed lighter. The weight of the humiliation began to lift. The crowd realized what they had witnessed. A massive injustice had been exposed, and a powerful truth had finally been spoken. Judgment without compassion is cruelty. The clerk stood frozen, unable to speak. The crowd remained silent, no longer watching like spectators. And Amara, who had walked in with nothing but hope, was now being seen, truly seen, and everything was about to change. The boutique's atmosphere shifted so completely it felt like the room had been flipped upside down. What had been a place of luxury and judgment suddenly became a stage for accountability. The designer's voice echoed through the store, calm and firm. This is not how we treat people, he said, looking directly at the clerk. Not in my store, not in my company, not in my name. The clerk stood rigid, her face pale. She looked like a woman who had been caught doing something she'd convinced herself was normal. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words failed her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a cold fear. The designer turned to the guard. Please escort her out, he said. The guard hesitated, but then nodded and moved forward. The clerk's eyes widened in shock, her posture stiffening. You can't do this, she snapped, trying to regain control. You're not the boss of me. The designer's expression didn't change. I am, he said quietly. And you're not the first person I've had to remind of that. The guard approached the clerk and she began to protest loudly, her voice echoing through the boutique. But her words sounded hollow now. The crowd watched, stunned. No one offered support. A few people shifted uncomfortably, as if suddenly aware that they'd been silent witnesses to cruelty. The guard guided the clerk toward the door. Her heels clicked on the marble floor as she walked out, her head held high in defiance, but her eyes showed fear. She reached the doorway and paused, turning back one last time. "This isn't over," she said, her voice shaking. "You'll regret this." The designer didn't respond. He simply watched her leave. Then he turned back to Amara. "Are you okay?" He asked again gently. Amara's eyes were wide, her breath still shaky. I think so," she whispered. The designer nodded as if he already knew the answer. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, elegant envelope. He held it out to her. "This is for you," he said. "Please open it." Amara's hands trembled as she took the envelope. Her fingers were numb, but she carefully opened it, as if afraid to tear the paper. Inside was a card. A simple, beautifully designed card with the designer's logo on it. On it in clean, bold letters were words that made her heart nearly stop. "You are chosen." Amara stared at the card, unable to speak. The designer smiled gently. "I want you to come with me," he said. "Not just today, not just for a moment. I want to help you build a future." Amara's eyes filled with tears again, but these were tears of disbelief, tears of gratitude. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why me?" The designer's expression softened. "Because you didn't come here looking for a handout," he said. "You came here because you were desperate and you had the courage to ask for help." Amara shook her head slowly. "I didn't deserve this," she said. The designer placed a hand over his heart. "You do," he replied, "and so does your brother." Amara swallowed hard, her voice shaking. "My brother is sick," she said. "He needs medicine. I don't know what I'm going to do." The designer's gaze turned serious. "Then we're going to make sure he gets it," he said. "And more." Amara's breath caught. The designer continued, speaking with a calm authority that made every word land like a promise. "I'm going to take care of you," he said. "Not just for today, not just for a moment. I'm going to provide the support you need, medical care, financial stability, education, housing, everything you've been fighting for." Amara's knees weakened. She blinked rapidly, unable to believe what she was hearing. "But how?" she whispered. "How can you do all that?" The designer smiled. "Because I have the means," he said simply, "and because I've been waiting for someone like you." The crowd around them was still silent, but now the silence was different. It was filled with awe, with regret, with the realization that they had been wrong. The designer stepped closer to Amara, lowering his voice. "I want you to know something," he said gently. "This is not charity." Amara blinked. "What is it then?" she asked. "It's justice," he replied. "And it's compassion." Amara's eyes filled with tears again. She bowed her head, overwhelmed. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. The designer shook his head. "You don't need to," he said. "Just promise me something." Amara looked up, her eyes searching his. "What?" she asked. "Promise me you'll never let someone else feel the way you felt today," he said. "Promise me you'll stand up for others." Amara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I promise," she said. The designer smiled, and the first true warmth Amara had felt all day spread through her chest like sunlight breaking through clouds. He reached into his coat again and pulled out a small notebook. "This is for you," he said, handing it to her. "It's an invitation, a job offer, a place to start." Amara stared at the notebook, then at him. "A job?" she asked, stunned. The designer nodded. "Yes," he said. "You're going to be part of my new collection, not as a model, as a creative partner. Someone who brings real life into the work." Amara's voice cracked. "I don't know anything about fashion," she whispered. The designer's eyes glimmered. "You know more than you think," he said. "You know what it means to be human. You know what it means to fight. You know what it means to love. That's what I want." Amara's chest tightened. She looked at the crowd, still silent, then she looked back at the designer. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. The designer smiled warmly. "Then say this," he said. "Say yes." Amara nodded slowly. "Yes," she whispered. The designer stepped closer and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Good," he said, "because today your life changes." The crowd watched as Amara stood there, trembling but no longer broken. She had been humiliated, she had been judged, but she had also been seen, and for the first time in her life she felt like she belonged to something bigger than herself. A new chapter had begun, one filled with dignity, with hope, and with the promise of a future she never thought she would have. Years passed, and yet the memory of that day never left Amara. It lived in her the way scars live in skin, visible only when the light hit just right, a reminder of what she had survived and what she had become. The first time she returned to that boutique, it wasn't as a frightened woman hoping for help. It was as a confident, accomplished woman who walked through the doors with her head held high. The store had changed. The atmosphere was different. It no longer felt like a place that judged people before it knew their names. It felt like a place that welcomed stories. Amara's story. She had become a creative partner in the designer's new collection, a position he insisted she deserved not because she was inspiring, but because she was talented, insightful, and real. She had been given a scholarship to finish her education. She had been provided with a home for her and Caleb, medical care for her brother who had grown stronger and healthier with each passing year, a steady income, stability, peace, and most importantly, dignity. She had also been given something else, a purpose. Amara began using her platform to help people in her old neighborhood, offering mentorship, donating resources, and giving voice to those who had been ignored. She didn't forget where she came from. She didn't forget what it felt like to be laughed at. She didn't forget the weight of silence. But she learned to turn that pain into power. One afternoon, she sat in a bright studio filled with fabric swatches and sketches. Her hands were busy working on a new design, but her mind was elsewhere, thinking about the day that had changed everything. She had come a long way, but she still remembered the look on the clerk's face. The humiliation, the silence, the moment she thought she was truly alone. She smiled, a gentle smile filled with gratitude. Her phone buzzed, a message from Caleb. "Guess what? I got an A on my science project." Her heart swelled. She typed back quickly. "I'm so proud of you. Keep going, baby. You're going to change the world." Amara stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city. She could see her old neighborhood from afar, its narrow streets, its worn buildings, its people moving through their lives. She thought about how many others were still living in that place of struggle, how many were still judged before they were known. Her heart tightened. She knew she couldn't save everyone, but she could help, and she would. The designer had become more than a mentor. He had become a friend, a guiding force, a person who had shown her that compassion wasn't weakness, it was strength. One evening, Amara was invited to speak at an event hosted by the designer's company. The theme was stories that change the world. She stood on the stage, looking out at a crowd of faces, some familiar, some new, some from the world she had once feared, some from the world she had once dreamed of joining. Her voice was steady, her eyes were bright. She began speaking, and the room fell silent. "I used to believe that the world would only treat me as well as my clothes allowed," she said. "I thought my worth was something I had to prove every day. I thought I had to hide my struggle. I thought I had to be small." She paused, her gaze drifting to the front row where the designer sat, watching her with pride. "But then something happened," she continued. "Someone chose to see me, not my coat, not my shoes, not my situation, but me." The audience listened, captivated. "And I want you to know something," Amara said, her voice steady with conviction. "Your dignity is not negotiable, your story is not a costume, and your worth is not determined by anyone who has never had to walk in your shoes." A soft murmur of agreement spread through the room. She smiled gently, her eyes glistening. "Today," she said, "I'm not just here because I was chosen, I'm here because I chose myself." The room erupted into applause, and in that moment Amara felt something she had never felt before. Not fear, not shame, but peace, because she knew that her life was no longer controlled by the judgment of others. It was controlled by her own strength, her own compassion, and her own purpose. The moral: never judge someone by their appearance, because their story is deeper than you can imagine. Kindness can change a life, and compassion is the most powerful form of justice. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to the channel for more inspirational stories that remind us of the power of humanity. Thank you for watching.